won't repeat as much if you did go to a session. But we certainly are talking about SharePoint Online. We're going to spend 75 minutes learning all about it. It is targeted at a 200 level. There's a lot more in the rest of the week. If you're really interested in the developer side, I'll cover it real briefly towards the end. But we've got two great sessions by Chris Mayo. And I'll call those out again if you want to jot down the session numbers. But they'll go a little bit further into developer. So I'm going to spend most of the time on the end user experience. A lot of new features. What does it look like in the beta? How it's running. I'll spend most of my time in demo, but we'll have a few slides and a few referential slides at the end so you can get a little idea of what this thing, SharePoint Online, is in Office 365. So that's pretty much it. That's all we're going to do. We're going to talk, we're going to show, and then time for questions. Can certainly take questions throughout. If you have them, don't hesitate to raise your hand or speak up a little bit if I don't see your hand. But we'll have time at the end. If you have questions, whether they're technical or business or not even SharePoint Online related, I'll answer any cloud questions, or at least I'll try. So when we look at what SharePoint is, part of how we're going about it is it gives us a new opportunity to talk about SharePoint to people who have never used SharePoint before. So I'm not going to bore you with the what is SharePoint, but I do want to at least set the context of where it fits into Office 365. So where Aaron spent a little time just before lunch, or I guess just after lunch, was broadly talking about what is the suite. And I just want to be real clear, when we say SharePoint Online, it is one of the core workloads that's in Office 365. But when you jump into it, the what is SharePoint, it is just SharePoint. The long version, which they didn't like my name, was SharePoint 2010 hosted as a service by Microsoft in our data centers. But that title didn't fly, so they just went with SharePoint Online. But that's the reality of what it is. It is a service, so it is something that you subscribe to, and it is something we manage. But beyond that, if you have an awareness of what is SharePoint, then you're halfway there. In this session, I won't spend too much time on the what is. But as we get to at least speak to some new audiences, not just here at Tech Ed, but just, again, kind of what is SharePoint, we're focusing around the different types of sites that you can build. And with SharePoint Online, you can have a personal experience. So if you've used My Sites in the past, or if you haven't, or at least have maybe evaluated them in SharePoint 2010, SharePoint 2010 My Sites in SharePoint Online are exactly the same. The way that people would leverage them, they would have their own personal experience. They could create new sites under their My Site. They could store personal documents. They could give and take away permissions, both in a shared documents or personal documents. It's their personal experience. It's also a way for them to add elements about how they describe themselves. So in the social aspects of SharePoint, and certainly in SharePoint Online, we love to be social in the cloud as well. And in the My Site is where you see information about people, but it's also a place where I can put in, I like to play soccer, or I'm a SharePoint Online expert. So that when people do a search, either on me or on that subject, they'll either find documents on that subject, or they might find me in a people search. So moving from the spectrum of being a personal experience in SharePoint, which is the My Site, and moving that into a team site. This is kind of the bread and butter. If you know or have used SharePoint in the past, team sites are kind of bread and butter. This is where projects come together. This is where we track milestones and documents and data and use that to get a view on the data and do lots of things. And you'll see a lot, hopefully, in the demo that makes some of that real. But this is sort of not just a single person. This might be 10, 20, several hundred people working on the same document, working on the same set of information, and collaborating all the way through. Moving all the way to the right, we've got intranet sites. And I would love to hear if somebody's got a better term, because I'm dying to use one. But the old term that just sort of keeps resonating in my head is the company portal. And to be honest, this is one of the things that a lot of our larger customers who are already adopting in the cloud are what they're using the cloud for, to put in highly customized company portals that have a very specific need to do a one-to-many. So they might have an HR portal where everybody has to go during review time and start some process on documents or forms they need to fill out. Or in the demo, what I'll show you is a scenario around an IT department who has put up a workflow that starts off with a simple form that goes for people who want to order a new piece of hardware. But it's that one-to-many. And then a little bit later, it really more in demo than in speaking, I'll share with you one of the new components that we have coming with SharePoint Online, which is a simple public-facing website. It's a little bit more targeted towards small and medium businesses, but I at least want to give you a face to what that is, how you create it, and then obviously what it looks like when it's running live. But it is an anonymously accessible website that is a part of the Office 365 investment. We also have one last item that's pervasive mostly through all of what you see here, which is external sharing. So we have the ability to work with all of our colleagues that are a part of our company, but we also now have the capability in Office 365 to invite people who are not part of our company. And that's basically you enable the capability in the site collection, and then you invite somebody externally by sending them an email that's a unique invitation, and we can walk through that. So that's kind of the what is SharePoint, what is SharePoint Online, but really what is it in Office 365. This is kind of a copy-paste from Aaron's deck, just from the say, we're talking about the same thing. So the real capture here is SharePoint Online is not just less than SharePoint on premises anymore. Certainly there are still some deltas, some features, some capabilities that we aren't yet having available in the hosted environment. And I call those out here on the bottom. Some of them are our higher-end enterprise features, like Fast and Performance Point. And those are, in our next wave, going to be available. The reason why a lot of the stuff on the bottom is not yet available in SharePoint Online is because they weren't yet architected for a multi-tenant environment. And everything in Office 365 is big, giant farms, but as customers, you're a tenant on that farm. And the way that SharePoint thinks about that is there is still central administration, but that's Microsoft. And then there's tenant administration, or what we call the SharePoint Online Administration Center, and that's where the customer starts to manage their environment. And then everything below that is just generating site collections, and think of different business units could have different site collections. So some features weren't yet scoped at that tenant level, but they will be in our next release. So that is a lot of this capabilities that kind of is the divide between SharePoint on premises and SharePoint Online will be coming to online, and that's pretty important to us as we want to mature the service as we go through every release. So to drill into it, if we look across both the sites, which is websites, basically what we've been talking about, and communities, if we look across that from just a workload perspective of what SharePoint does, we've already talked about my sites, team sites. When we start talking about the social side, we certainly want to make sure that you know we support wikis and blogs, tagging, rating, commenting, all the real richness of SharePoint 2010 in terms of social computing. We certainly integrate with Office. We support both Office 2007 and Office 2010. And the experiences you would expect, Office on the client, SharePoint as a service on the back end, working with documents, saving them, putting them through review and approval cycles, working with metadata, all the stuff that you certainly would do on premises is very much supported. We absolutely support taking content offline, even though it's a little bit ironic that you're putting all of your content online and then you want to take it offline. But SharePoint Workspace, if you haven't used it, I absolutely encourage you to use it, or at least to try it out, because it's a great way to take your content when you're traveling. It's really great in low latency if you've got a bad internet connection. If you've got your content offline and with you, you at least can still work with it. And when you come back online, it just updates the delta. So if I just went in and made a small change, added a note to the slide, when I synced back up, it would just sync over that change. So it's really quick. So once you have it off, and I do it a lot with my site, take all my documents with me, I can work with them through SharePoint Workspace, and I don't have to remember to upload or change or whatnot. And it's already, the main copy is the one on the server, or in the service, but I'm working with it on my desktop, and it doesn't matter whether I have an internet connection. And then finally, that simple public-facing website, it'll give a face to the name soon so that it's not a mystery, but it is an exciting new part of Office 365. So switching over to another core aspect of SharePoint is content management. So we support a ton of different features that are new in 2010 or just core to SharePoint. A lot of the new stuff on the right-hand side, we certainly integrate and have available already the Office web apps. We support document IDs, document sets, legal holds, and we have a term called in-place records management that I'll show you, where you can just work with content, declare it as a record. You do holds and e-discovery in the cloud. Again, it's just SharePoint. But absolutely, we support all the different types of document libraries. I forgot to mention on the top, if you've used SharePoint 2010 or even SharePoint in the past, we ship with a number of site templates out of the box. And we support all the site templates that are in the box. They're now available in the cloud. And then I'll give you a little demonstration of how we do metadata management as well, so you can see how we support taxonomy and term sets. And that's at the tenant level that are then consumed by each site collection. So around search, on one side we don't support fast, certainly looking to do that in the future, but we do support a level of enterprise search, which is really just search out of the box without FAST. So we have a real rich set of search results. We could do people search, phonetic search. We do view in browser, so if you get a search result back that you're interested in, you can just quickly view it in the browser, identify, yep, that's the one I was looking for, and close out and move on, or then open it up in whatever the corresponding application was. But it's a really nice experience. We also support best bets. You can go in and work with the scopes and search refiners at a broad level or very targeted towards each different site collection. And the big win is we now support cross-site search collection, which is really not a feature of SharePoint 2010. It was just a limitation of the BPOS environment, which was the current available service, the Business Productivity Online Suite, which, just for a little bit of clarity, Office 365 is essentially BPOS version next. But it's very new. It has all of the 2010 platform products. But one of the limitations was you could only do a site collection scoped search, which was pretty limiting. So at least we now support that cross-site search collection. So the final thing covering here is really that we are bringing enterprise features to SharePoint Online. So typically these are found in the enterprise SKU, and we won't really go into licensing here, but there is a license that is a higher SKU for Office 365, which is where you will find the 4 enterprise features, which are Access Services, Excel Services, InfoPath Services, and Visio Services. And I'll give you a demonstration of all that stuff so you can see it running in the cloud, in the public beta, running right now. And also in this area, we have a lot of sessions that are going to cover how you can develop real custom code in Visual Studio and uploading that into SharePoint Online. We absolutely support the sandbox. And the sandbox is basically a site collection scoped area where I can write a custom solution, a business application, big or small, as long as it fits the criteria of the sandbox, which we've got a lot of documentation on. But basically think if I can do something at the site collection, I can do a sandbox solution. I've got a sample sandbox solution that you'll see that we built. I'll kind of put a reason why we built it behind it. But again, it's just a sample, and you'll see it's not an out-of-box, but it certainly makes it a richer experience. And we support certainly Silverlight. And again, the 2 sessions that I mentioned will go a lot deeper into the how and then the deployment side of it. So switching gears a little bit away from features and landing on, at least focus first on the left the left column and the middle column. These are all different scenarios or different types of experiences we think our customers are going to want to do on SharePoint Online. And so everything on the left-hand side are the types of activities you could do probably within a couple of weeks, if not a couple of hours or days. So we really land on different scenarios where people are obviously building intranet sites, and I'll show you our sample one that we've built. Obviously team sites and project sites. People putting up their different blogs, or if they wanted to put up a corporate blog or maybe an executive blog. Those are types of things in SharePoint Online you could do out of the box, pure configuration. If you want to customize further, of course you can. But one nice detail, this is true for the whole service, is if you've ever used Exchange or SharePoint or Lync on premises, just think for a second how long it took to deploy that. And I don't mean that to be a negative. I just mean that typically when you're installing it, you got to go through the IT department. You got to make sure that you have your business requirements in and agreed on. And of course, then there's custom development that goes after that. When you go to Office 365, the whole suite, our goal, and now in beta, we're landing about at 80%, and we're improving this over every day as they're adjusting the system and scaling it. But our goal is that you can provision the whole suite and have email, instant messaging, and collaboration in 15 minutes. And for SharePoint, once you are provisioned, the first thing you get is a team site. But then you can quickly, with under a couple of minutes, create new site collections with new intent. And we think a lot of the things on the left and in the middle represent different scenarios, different things that you will do. But again, the left-hand side would be different experiences or sites that you could build relatively quickly, and maybe would be your first move to the cloud. In the middle might be a little bit more customization, a little bit more configuration, a little bit more buy-in from different teams to leverage SharePoint Online in this way. And then everything on the right-hand side is what we're working on for the future. And certainly it's a pretty targeted list of the way that we describe features now. And certainly we'll have a lot of announcements coming when we start talking about the next wave of innovation, which for us we're just labeling Office 15. But certainly one investment that you make when you make in Office 365 is that you will always be on the latest and greatest. And right now we're in that flux period in moving from the 2007 platforms to the 2010 platforms. But it's at no cost to the customer, and certainly there is awareness of when we're moving, and you certainly have a choice of when you move within a year. But it's pretty exciting if you look on the right-hand side. That's these are technologies that are capabilities that aren't just easy to move to the cloud, or certainly for customers and partners to think about doing these kinds of things in the cloud. Yes, the capability might be there, but we might still have a couple of years where people are actually wanting to put this kind of data in the cloud. But once we move beyond some of those perceptions of the cloud, if not already, I think we'll have some really exciting capabilities in the future, which will just build on future investments if you choose to go Office 365. So last thing before we start just looking at some stuff and seeing some fun demos is talking about what does SharePoint Online mean in a hybrid state. And we're just at this stage talking around 3 different aspects of what going hybrid means to SharePoint. Some of it might just be that you're offloading different workloads up to the cloud. There might be some workloads, one being maybe external sharing, that just works better in the cloud because it's just always on, it's always internet facing, it's secure, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go through a VPN. So setting up for projects and different teams to share and work externally with their vendors, partners, maybe even clients is just a couple clicks away. So it may be that you have certain workloads that you move to the cloud, be it team sites, my sites, or some of this external sharing, and you might keep some of that connection that you have to SAP, some of the things that we don't yet support, or you're not ready to move to the cloud, and you keep that on premises. One aspect that we have that's coming that's pervasive throughout the whole system is the single sign-on capability. And for SharePoint, that means I sign into my machine, and then I hit a site. Maybe as an end user, I have no idea where the site is hosted. But let's say that site is on premises. Sign into my machine. Of course, I get access to that SharePoint site. Since I'm federated with our system, which you can do in Office 365, I then navigate to a site that's hosted in SharePoint Online, and I have that same sign-on experience. Once I'm signed into my machine, I'll just sign into whatever site I go to that I have permissions and access to get to. So we have that aspect of single sign-on. And it may be that some users are more supported by the cloud. We've seen some scenarios in the beta where the headquarters is based still using on-premises SharePoint. That's where they have their investment. But for some of their outlying branch offices, which can be a distance away from headquarters, they're starting to leverage the cloud. And we're seeing that both large and small companies. So one other aspect is around licensing, and I don't want to bore you with licensing, but I think it's an important point when you start to consider maybe getting a toe in the water, moving to SharePoint Online, is some of our SKUs, if you are investing what we call in a user subscription license, which is the Office 365 license per individual, and it's a monthly cost per person. For those individuals that have a USL, it would also count towards them their on-premises core access license or client access license, which is for licensing terms the CAL. So we're not going to double charge you, but it also helps so that the hybrid story, if it is a direction that you want to go, is something that is not additionally painful in terms of financing and licensing. So any questions up to that point? Pretty 100, 200 level. So I thought we'd start to see some things, walk through a little bit more depth and features, but want to make sure that if there's any questions. At this stage, the answer is no, but I'm not in charge of making that decision, and I honestly don't know what the tipping point would be. I do know that you can have up to 50, so the small business offering, which is the term Office 365 for small business, you can have up to 50 users, but federating, I don't think it's a scenario that we yet support in terms of would a lot of small businesses do that. But if your feedback is that you think a lot of small businesses would have an investment in AD, I'll find out the answer for you, but I don't know off the top of my head. Any other questions? In the back there. Yep. So the question is, does SharePoint Online support workflow? And the answer is yes. Yep, it supports workflow out of the box. It also supports custom workflows if you were to build them in SharePoint Designer. And you'll see one in my demo just that shows a pretty simple workflow, but it is a workflow that's running. And I'll show you visually as well. So the question was, is that SharePoint Designer level workflows, or is it Visual Studio workflows? And it's kind of a half response in that you could build a custom workflow activity and package it up as a sandbox solution. And then your regular running workflow that's typically a no-code workflow in SharePoint Designer would make a call to that custom activity. So you couldn't have a fully coded workflow, but you could have a custom activity that, again, in the context of SharePoint Online where it's running. Any other questions? All right. Oh, one more over here. How do you automate the deployments? So if I can guess, behind your question is, do we support PowerShell? Yep. So we're working on supporting PowerShell, but we don't yet support PowerShell for customer use. We use PowerShell heavily in the data center. So our SharePoint development team who owns the PowerShell is working on all the scripts and translating them into which ones would we enable customers to use. But at general availability, we won't have that. We won't have PowerShell access for customers. Yep. Yeah, no, you wouldn't have to go completely manually. But a lot of our migration story, we have a lot of great migration partners and partner tools. So once their tools are engaged and you've got, it doesn't have to even be from SharePoint. It could be from a file share. It could be from a third-party technology like Documentum or OpenText Artesia. But certainly, obviously, we support SharePoint as well. And once we're aware of where the source material is, the tools do the mapping and then map it into SharePoint Online. You can also, those tools, you can use the web services. So if you need to create a net new site collection based on an old site collection, it would create it and then move the content over. And it keeps all of the metadata intact as well. Yep. So the tools leverage them, but they're there to be leveraged by whomever wants to use them. They're just building their tools around the web services. And the ones that are available are everything at the site collection and down. Yep. Maybe one more question, then we'll move on. No, it's okay. From a storage perspective? Yeah, so the question was, is there a limit to the volume of storage per site collection or per end user? And I'll go quickly through the formula, which and it can be a little complicated, but I don't mean to say that it's good or bad. It just is, when you invest in SharePoint Online, the tenancy or the company will get 10 gigabytes. And then every additional user that you have, and let's say there are 5,000 users, you would get 500 megabytes per person towards the pool of storage. So about 5,000, that works out to about 2.5 terabytes of storage. And that's just the pool of storage. That's just available to your whole company. When it gets down to the site collection level, you can allocate up to 100 gigabytes per site collection. And then everybody's individual My Site, when it gets created, when you first go to your profile page, it's not actually a site collection yet. But when you click My Content, it'll generate a new site collection, and that's scoped at 500 megabytes. Not the 500 pooled, but 500 personal storage. So, I think to answer your question, it's 100 gigs per site collection, and effectively per individual you get 500 personal and 500 that you are just contributing to the overall pool. And you can always buy additional storage as well, but that's per gigabyte. Okay, so let's start seeing a few things, and certainly stop me if you have any questions as we go, and I might have to reset my resolution and share out my desktop. All right, maybe just a verbal cue. Does that look all right in the back? Okay. So what you're seeing here is a custom company portal. This is our fake company called Fabricam, and they focus on home furnishings, so that just to land on a theme. And I'll be wearing a couple different hats throughout, and really it's a little bit more of a feature tour, not a thin red line storytelling. But I'll hit on a few things. I first just want to call out that everything you see here obviously is customized from a design perspective, but is also just SharePoint under the covers. So we'll kind of dive under the covers a little bit. So we've got a couple of lists that are generating a lot of the content here, and obviously some custom site navigation. But you'll see we have a little JavaScript web part here that's navigating through a list that has 4 items in it. If I were to add a 5th, it would cycle through 5. If I had 6 or took out 1, it would adjust dynamically per the list. I also have the ability to have a list that's coming, call it out here, and actually I'm formatting the list per HTML. But again, just a standard list. And then just real quickly, take a note here on this image. We've just programmed it so that every time you come to it, it'll refresh from that bed picture. And then it'll pull the next item on the list. And once it refreshes here, we're still on the bed. Let's try that one more time. Always fun. Still on the bed. Anyway, that was the intent of the demo. So you'll see these cycling through. So let's look under the covers and move beyond the immovable bed. It must be made of stone. So let's view all content. And hopefully, if you've used SharePoint, as I start to dive under this, you'll see we're just using SharePoint. But if this is new to you, hopefully just exposing a little bit about what drives SharePoint. A lot of what drives SharePoint is lists. So that featured stories item, you'll see, is just a list. And so here is the main headline, here's the excerpt, and here's that photo. And then you'll see that there are 4 of them. If I go back to the web page, you'll see, oops, go back to the home page. You'll see as it's cycling through, here's the headline, here's the excerpt, and here's the image. And just navigating through. So those are the basics. Now moving into something that's a little bit more of a scenario. So the scenario here is I'm an end user, and I want to request a new piece of hardware. And so I want to go to IT, and effectively we're just calling it IT Web, and I'm going to start a hardware request. What this is going to do is it's going to open up an InfoPath form. So when we started building this demo, it was just your basic XML form, the out-of-box associated to a list type form. Question?
So the authentication happens against corporate ID, or you have a separate ID that is set up?
Yep. So the question is, how am I authenticating into in this environment? Right now, I'm not federated with Active Directory, just in the way that I'm here. So my first stop is to go to the Microsoft Online Directory Service, and it says, is Mark an Office 365 user? Does he have a license? Yes. And then it lets me in. If I'm federated with Active Directory, it's going to go to that same Active Directory in the cloud, which is the Microsoft Online Directory Service, and say, yes, he's licensed, but I don't have the authority to give him permission to come into the site because I've federated with Active Directory on premises, which then is, obviously a separate setup. But once you've made that trust setup, it's a one-way trust where we just know who the person is, but the authentication comes from Active Directory on premises. So you can do it in a couple different ways, but that's a great question. But in this environment, I'm just signed into the service. I don't really have anything that I'm going to check against except for the service. So anyway, this is a form that we mocked up, obviously, to map a little bit to the color and the design scheme of the site. But it really just is a form on the back end. But as you'll start to see, it's a smart form. So I, as the requester, sorry, say again? Yes. Correct. You got it. So this part of it right here, if I wanted this kind of form, I could customize a form pretty far just using SharePoint Designer. But if I want to go a little bit further, InfoPath, just by the nature of it, makes it so you can make richer forms. And then converting it into a browser-based form, which is what you see here, is that InfoPath Form Services, which is running. So yes. So I'm going to be the requester. I'm going to make my manager, Karen Berg, the approver. And then when this form starts to get intelligent is if I hover over here, and let's say I wanted to order a keyboard, I'm going to click on a keyboard. It auto-populates the hardware type. But it also is pulling from a back-end list that this form is doing a list lookup to say, oh, keyboard, show these 3 items. So you'll see there are the three items. What I want to do is I actually want to order a new laptop. So again, the form adjusts to hardware type laptop, and now it's a different 3 items. And I'm going to go in and choose the middle one, which has a little bit of logic on the back end. So it populates a little description, but it also gives me a little call out and says, whoa, this goes over your purchasing limit. This is going to require an executive approval. And I say, no problem. So I give a little reason. So that's my reason, and I'm going to submit it. And if you can't see that, it's just a doctor's orders to get a lighter laptop. So all this is doing from an end user perspective is I filled out my form, I submit it, and now I hope that my new laptop will come soon. By nature of the demo, we just kind of punted ourselves to the actual list where that form was last submitted. And you'll see here's the hardware request form and a lot of them in progress. I'm going to show you one that I did just before this because it takes just a second in this environment right now for it to show up. So now as switching hats from end user to somebody who's actually going to be monitoring all of these requests that are coming in, somebody who's in the hardware request department. But the workflow, and the question that was asked earlier is, do we support workflow? This is an actual diagram of the workflow that is now running based on that hardware request. So it shows two things. It shows the actual workflow that's running, and as we go through the different steps, you'll see that it's checking a box that's letting me know I'm at this point into the workflow. I'm at this point into the workflow. And for this particular workflow, we actually started in Visio and designed what we thought the business logic was for the workflow, brought it into SharePoint Designer, prettied it up a little bit and added a little bit more custom logic, and then imported it into SharePoint Online directly from SharePoint Designer. If I hadn't done the work in Visio, I can still get the experience that you're seeing here. It'll just kind of generate a faux Visio form so that I can at least have a visual on my workflow and where it's running. And then what you see me zooming in and out is really what is the Visio services that's running to render this diagram, which started as a real Visio diagram. But if it wasn't a real Visio diagram, it would have just built out the workflow based on just a generic look and feel. But you can certainly make this as pretty or as generic as you want. So this one goes through, and then the final hat that I want to wear is just somebody who's going in and just looking at how proficient are we. So we've built out a simple IT dashboard, and it's using a couple of things. It's using Excel services to render data that's being stored in an Excel workbook, but rendering on the page as a graph, as an image. And then the two on the left side here are just leveraging what has a long name, but is the Excel web app web part that just plugs into the similar spreadsheet where this data is being stored every time we submit the information. And then on the upper right-hand side is just a KPI chart that certainly is just an out-of-box web part. And every time a hardware request gets approved, this is that top number that would change. And so right now I'm a little bit behind on all my approvals. But just at a glance, that's a little bit on a scenario around hardware requests, InfoPath forms, Excel services, and certainly workflow that's driving the whole experience and at least keeping that a managed process. So let's move into something that's a little bit more social. So we have in here a design team blog, and blogs being what they are, I won't spend too much time on the how you post and what they are. But just looking a little bit at managing and then carrying it over to a little bit of the content management aspects. These are the 3 posts. So obviously this is the rendering from an end user perspective, but if I'm the one posting the post or managing them, I'm going in and now I'm just managing a list like any other, remembering that SharePoint is very much driven by lists. But to the extent of, let's say, bed posts are in, but they're dangerous. So we want to make sure that we go in, and on this particular item, we want to declare it as a record. And I'll show you a couple aspects where this shows, once I've got this feature turned on, I can declare pretty much anything I want as a record. And I'll show just a quick demo also of just putting a hold on a group of assets, not just going around individually. But if I declare this a record, it's going to ask me, are you sure? And then the only thing that changes on this post is it's now not deletable and it's not editable. Doesn't mean it disappears, but it just means I've just declare this as a record, in a scenario where we're locking down and somebody is wanting to make sure that we're not trying to cover our tracks on anything. So if I transfer over from what is a blog post and navigate to our what we have in here is our main marketing site, I'll show you a few additional things. Maybe. There we go. So going from the company portal and going down a little bit now to more of a team that's working together. This is the marketing department, and we've just put a couple of key web parts that we think would be really useful for a team site. Again, we've got KPIs that we're tracking, we've got the team calendar, and then documents. And one of the first things I want to show you is just what the Office web apps look like in Office 365. So the big difference from on-premises deployments is you would deploy SharePoint, install it, configure it, and then on top of that would just be a separate install if you chose to have Office web apps in your environment. In Office 365, they come pre-integrated, so they're just there. And again, not to try to talk too much about licensing, but there are some SKUs that have both view and edit capabilities with the Office web apps. and there are some that are just view only. So the experience you're seeing here is I've got credentials that can view and edit. And so this is what a nice document, that's got a lot of aspects to it in terms of the fidelity of the document. And then if I were to go in and edit in the browser, you'll see some things turn into placeholders, but a lot of it, this content is now editable. So I can go in here and make a quick change to today's date and save that back. And now anybody who comes to this document obviously is going to see that updated version. So pretty straightforward, the Office web apps. The thing that we've now built, though, is a custom activity. I want to pull up one other site just to show you kind of one area that I'm going to go back to. Again, this site that I'm pulling up here is just another team site. It has a different branding and theming, but you'll see it's got a different configuration, a little bit of Excel services running here. But if I actually go into Shared Documents folder, I just want to highlight one area that obviously is an out-of-box experience. And when it pulls up here, you'll notice on the left-hand side in the ribbon up here is the New Documents drop-down. It's taking a little bit to load here. Anybody familiar or like content types? Knows what that means? A couple? Good. So we certainly support content types, and what I'm about to show you is just a web part that has a little reason why we built it, but also just wanting to show that you can bring in custom code. So if I go to Documents, and you'll see, oops, this already does have it loaded. That's not what I wanted to show you. Anyway, let me back up here. I'm trying to show you one without the sandbox solution applied to it. And I just have to go into this environment. So Documents. So I have a sandbox solution that's deployed at the site collection level. And this particular solution is then you can scope it to the different site level. So here is the New Documents folder. And you see it's just got the standard out-of-box content type of Word, but nothing else. And when I click to open this, if I have Office installed on my desktop, it's going to open up Word. If I don't have Office installed on my desktop, then it's going to go right to the web apps. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to see if we could fool SharePoint a little bit and leverage directly to the web apps. So I'll just show you the experience here. If I click, it's going to launch Word. And I can't change that behavior in terms of out-of-box. So that's Word. If I go back to the site that we were just on and go to my marketing site, sorry, up level, I'll show you that sandbox solution. And I guess I want to first show you what I mean by sandbox solutions a little bit more. So if I go into Solutions, and this is the sandbox. Whenever you hear the term the sandbox in SharePoint 2010, it also just means the solution gallery, where you upload custom code. So these are all the different custom coded solutions that are just packaged up as a standard SharePoint package, a WSP. And this particular one right here, I've uploaded and activated, and we've just called it the SharePoint Online Doc Creator. So if I go to my team site, and I go to my Product Marketing Documents page, and I go now to Documents, you'll see this is now that custom solution that since I've activated it and okayed it for this site collection and enabled that feature, when I go here now to show you all the new content types that I've associated to this, you'll see I've got a number of Word documents, a PowerPoint, Excel, OneNote, and I've also got a document set. If I go into my custom solution, you'll see that what it does is it filters it by content type, and the default experience when I click it is going to actually launch me straight into the web apps. And this will just show you experience. If I was somebody in Office 365 who didn't have my own machine, didn't have my own desktop, and also didn't have Word installed or Office, this is the experience that it would be. So new for Tech Ed, hit OK. And this is obviously a template, so it's going to load the template as now a net new item. And we'll just put in something that's simple for test, and then we'll save that down. And now I've got a new document in my Product Marketing Documents, and we'll see, let's see how a little, there it is right there. And then if I wanted to go in and view this in the browser or view it in Word, it's now just a new document derived from that template. So if you knew about content types, this is pretty basic. If you didn't know, it's a real powerful part of SharePoint where you can go in and build out a nice template that's maybe 70% there and have a workflow where people come, fill out this, submit it, and off they go. And obviously you see the final document here. So let's go back and navigate back to the marketing site. I'm on the wrong site. And I want to show you another thing that we've done is just to show you a little bit about Access services. So this particular application was built in Access 2010 on the desktop. And really the concept here in terms of scenario is we just want to generate ideas, and we know that our employees have a lot of great ideas. So we just want to give them a site where they can go in, submit their ideas. We can capture them, review them, and then either take action on them or not. And then I want to show you a little bit of what's going on behind this. So here I'm going in and just saying pillows in the lounges for a little bit more comfort. And then I'll submit that. And you'll see it's going to say, thank you for your idea. We're listening. And you'll see that my item was just thrown at the top here. And in this application, I can go in and vote it up. I can only do it once, so I can't go and give myself too many clicks. But what's really going on here is, first, here is that same Access database built in Access. And then all we did once we had the forms and associated different pages and lists, or different tables, we took it from Access and published it straight to SharePoint Online. And what it did is it used Access services to convert it into SharePoint-based forms. It took the tables and converted them into SharePoint lists. And so the proof to... Is there a question? Coffee? I've got water if you need it here. So there's Access on the desktop. Obviously, the whole intent of using Access with SharePoint is you take it off the desktop. Instead of saying, hey, come to my office if you want to read the data, you can publish it up to SharePoint, send them a link, and then anybody who has privileges to go to that site can go to this particular business application. And then just to look a little bit under the covers, if you navigate to actually the lists and the forms that were generated, here are those lists. And the one that's one that I want to show you is just the ideas list. So when I click in here, obviously we're going to kind of lose the prettiness, a lot of the end user feel to it. But I can also just come in here and manage this list like any other in SharePoint. And this is obviously a particular view. And if I scroll down, you'll see the new item that we put in here, pillows in the lounges, submitted by me at a certain time. And then whatever I wanted to do with this data, I could export it to Excel. I could put a view on it and create little web parts that show a certain amount of information. And effectively, keep using this data and just having Access be that collection of data. So continuing down, kind of narrowing in from company portal to team sites to now what a My Site looks like. Obviously, we've got, yep, question. Yeah. Yep. Pretty much. There are not everything, if you build it in Access, will convert to the cloud. But Access 2010 is really clear that if you're building something that's not cloud ready, it'll tell you. There's a little icon that looks like the world. But pretty much if you build a table in Access, you basically just go send to SharePoint. You choose your SharePoint site. It creates a whole new site with lists and everything underneath it. So that main that I showed you, which is kind of the pretty looking enter the information here, is the parent site after you publish. And then the lists underneath it are just sub to it. For the parent database, that's right. So this is my site in this environment. Again, we've maintained the master page all the way through. So if you want to build that consistent feel as end users are navigating the site, obviously I can update my status. I can show you a little bit more information that I've tracked here and described myself. We certainly support the the Silverlight control that shows hierarchy. So my manager is Karen. Everybody who works under Karen is here, and then Karen's manager kind of disappeared up top here. See if we can get him back. And then obviously you see all of my peers. And then when it comes to content, that 500 megabytes that gets created when I create my content side of my site, this is where I go to store my own personal documents. And once I get to the level of the shared documents, we haven't gotten there yet in this particular demo environment, but I could further skin it and make this additional master page consume that same look and feel with the couch. But really at this point I'm just managing my own content. I can invite people and limit the permissions, so it might be company-wide at first, but I have control if I wanted to take away all parent inheritance in terms of permissions, and then just manage on if I'm working with an individual. But this is not something that I would have to go to an IT department or get permissions from a site collection owner or from a tenant admin. This is my little personal area where I can store my documents, share them with others, do broadcasts from it, even create subsites if I wanted to, and really kind of be empowered and in control. But this is also where I layer on and describe a little bit about myself. So if I go in and edit my profile, I've added a few things, some real and some a little silly, of things that, ask me about SharePoint Online or ask me about West Coast sales. One of my favorite movies, ask me about Blade Runner. I'll spend as much time as you want talking about Blade Runner after the session. But what this translates into is either better search if people are looking for a Blade Runner expert, or something where if somebody comes and they want to ask me a question on the Blade Runner, they can click that button, click the link, and you'll see it pre-populates it with a question on Blade Runner. And is he a replicant? Anybody know the answer to that? All right. So still trying to figure that one out. But anyway, that's just a way that if somebody found me for whatever purpose they were looking for me, this is a way they could communicate to me. They can obviously, go to my presence information and reach out to me, call me, whatever they need to do. But this is effectively my site. And then final thing that I wanted to show you is what the admin console looks like. So if I go back and I go into the SharePoint Online Administration Center, if you went to Aaron's session just before this, he showed you a few aspects of the SharePoint Online Administration Center. And I'm going to dive a little bit deeper and just show you some aspects that I don't think he covered. But the main thing you do here is obviously manage your site collections. So the question around how much storage can be associated to a site collection, this is where you would go to either to create a new site collection. If you have a site collection that already exists, this is where you would go to add storage or take storage away or retire a site collection or do whatever you want. So I'm just going to get one started here so you can see a little bit about what it looks like to create a net new one. So here we'll just say Tech Ed, North America, and we'll just make it even clearer. And then this is the URL path that I want to have. And I have two choices here, sites or teams. So one question that comes up here sometimes is, do we support managed paths? And the answer is no, but we're certainly reviewing how we can because it comes up a lot. But this effectively is building out my URL structure. You see we support 40 languages. So we have language packs that are installed and pre-available, so they're just there if you want to leverage them. Obviously, they're pre-populated per the different regions where we're deployed. And right now we're going to be going to 38 markets, but we will support 40 languages, which is all the language packs that we have for SharePoint on premises. I'm going to keep it just in English so I can keep navigating. And I'll keep it to simple team site. Let's make it a little bit more relevant to where we're at with the Eastern time zone, making myself an admin. And then this, kind of to answer your question, I don't have 100 gigabytes in this environment, but if I wanted to, I could allocate as much storage as I want per what I have up to that limit. So I'm just going to give 200 megabytes. And then one thing that we have here that's just now new in the public beta is the ability to assign resource points, which if you're familiar with sandbox solution development, this is where you allocate how many solutions you're going to have or how much people are going to be using that custom solution. And it's not the easiest thing to get on day one. But basically, if you at least allocate one resource point, they'll at least function. But if you don't want people to do any custom dev work, this is one control point that the IT Pro would have to say 0, and then you can upload the packages, but they won't activate. So I'll at least give 10 resource points. If I knew this was going to be more customized environment like that Fabricam environment, I probably would give it more like 100 or 200. So that's going to spin. You'll see it here. There's a couple that are kind of building. But this should take no more than 3 to 5 minutes to create a net new site collection. And once it's done, I'll come back to it and show you what that is. And then we'll do a couple of things so that we can enable external sharing, we can activate features, and we can just look at it from an IT pro or an admin perspective. But I'm going to go back to just a few that are already created so that we can keep moving through a few things. I'm going to go to this particular site collection that right now has 500 megabytes associated to it and 50 resource points. So what does it look like to take storage away? So instead of 500, I'm going to give them now 200. And I have right here also a warning limit so that if it gets to a point where this particular site collection gets almost full, and I can judge on, do I want it 90% full, 95% full. And I have another setting in here where since I'm the IT pro or the admin of the environment, it would send me an email that says, hey, this site collection might need a little bit more storage. So we'll be a little less conservative and make them pull their hair out because they came to, well, I realized it a little bit later. So now they've got less storage, and they'll probably fill it up quicker, and that'll ping me. So another thing I can do on a different site collection is I can change the ownership of the site collection. So if I go in here and change owners, I can manage the administrators. This just means I can delegate to another user. So if I want to share the load, if I'm a bigger company, I might be the tenant admin who's going to create it, but then I want each business unit to be empowered. So I find somebody, or they let me know who that site collection owner is going to be. So what I'm doing here is I'm allocating a new site collection owner. By default, it kind of populates with me because I am the tenant admin. But I'm going to add my friend Checks, who's going to now have site collection ownership permissions, which for SharePoint Online is the second highest level of permissions that you can have. And all of Office 365 you can further delegate to a lot of different aspects of the service. This is just SharePoint specific. So resource usage quota is pretty straightforward, but I'll just show you so you see the UI. This is just going in, and if I wanted to give them more resource points because they're telling me their custom applications aren't running as effective as they should, or they've just got a lot of things going and they need more, I can just quickly allocate more. Question?
Yeah, the last version of SharePoint had a number of pre-defined templates. Are you bringing those back?
Yeah, so the question is, do we have what was referred to as the Fabulous 40? Fab 40 templates, and the answer is even for the on-premises SharePoint 2010, we don't support those 2007 templates. And we are working with either internally, but also with some partners. At our disclosure, when we announced Office 365, we also announced the Office 365 Marketplace. And we see that as a great opportunity where we're either going to build some templates and push them through the Marketplace, which just means they're not in product, but then you could go get them. Or, of course, our partners hopefully are going to see that opportunity to build a lot of different types of templates. It doesn't mean it's going to be the Fab 40, but I think if you targeted what were the Fab 5 or Fab 10, really the ones that were downloaded the most, I think those are the main targets. So I don't have a delivery date or an absolute, but I know that that's going to be a focus because it comes up a lot. Did I see another question? You bet. Yep. So the standard permissions as far as the ones that are just there, visitors, members, owners, contributors, those are all there by default. You can also define different roles, but per each individual, you can make them just a view only. Some SKUs are organized around it being a viewing experience. Somebody who is maybe a lesser of a cost from a licensing perspective, so they might have fewer capabilities. They couldn't be an administrator. They maybe can view a PowerPoint in a Office web app, but they couldn't edit it. But it certainly is built around permissions and claims per the directory service in the cloud. So last thing I wanted to show you here is enabling sharing by email, or what we term just external sharing. So the concept here is you've got either somebody at the CIO level or CEO level, or whomever is just making this decision, who says, you know what, I really like the concept of sharing externally, and we're going to leverage SharePoint Online to reach out and extend and share externally. So there's this master switch in the SharePoint Online Administration Center that just basically says, do you want to share or don't you? If you don't, you just deny, and then nobody, except for the tenant admin who can change it, can make this environment shareable. It's just going to be internal only. But also, if I allow it, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden all my site collections are open to the world for external sharing. So there's one additional step. So right now I'm set to allow. I could easily go back to deny if there's been some issue or somebody who maybe has just recently been fired, maybe opened up some things, and we want to just lock it down until everything's clear. This is that master switch, the master CIO switch. But since I'm already allowing, I'm going to go into one of my subsites here and show you what external sharing looks like and how to activate it. So there's one additional step that you need to do, and I go into Site Actions, and you'll see where it says Share Site. That would be from the end user perspective. If they have the right level of permissions, they can then share the site, and I'll show you that in 2 seconds. But what I want to do is I want to make sure that the feature is activated at this site collection level. So company-wide, somebody has said, yep, okay to share. At the site collection ownership level, they still have to approve it and say, yes, we want to share externally. So I'm going to go into my site collection features, which are here. And you'll see there's a lot of different features activated or deactivated. And to be honest, I can't remember if I had this one activated, so it's already active. But if you see here, it's this feature called External User Invitations. Allow external users to be invited to the site. So it's already activated. Again, I could deactivate it if I no longer wanted to do it, or at project end I wanted to ensure that I'm not allowing anybody external in anymore. But since it's already activated, I can go in, share this site, plug in my Hotmail account, or any email really for that matter. And then what this is going to do is send an email to my account that then basically is clickable, and it says the user has been added to the site, and unfortunately I'm hitting my little bug that I was hoping not to hit today. So the actual invitation hasn't been set, but I guarantee we'll be supporting this. So anyway, that would have sent an email out to whomever you sent it to. It could be a Yahoo account, it could be a Gmail account, a Hotmail account. They're going to receive this as an invitation that's just going to be a button they click that's going to then send them through to authenticate through our directory system on your behalf. If they already have an Office 365 account, they could be another customer using Office 365, they're going to use those Office 365 credentials. If they don't yet have Office 365, then they're just going to come in and they can have any live ID-based email to sign in. If they don't have one, they'll be directed to get one. Once they have it, those are their credentials, and they're now in that site collection and available to give more permissions to for that site collection, or limit if you want them to be put into another permissions group. Question?
Yeah, it's available in Office 365 small business.
Yes.
So does that count, does that user count against the user count?
So the question is, this is available in the Office 365 for small business in terms of external sharing? The answer is yes. Does it count against your user base? The answer is no. So the licensing for external sharing for both small business and the enterprise offering is you get 50 free in the small business, but you can't buy more. And then in the enterprise offering, you would get the first 50 free, and then you'd be able to buy additional in, I think, packs of 50. That's not final, but at a pretty cheap cost, lesser than the cost of the kiosk worker I mentioned earlier. So there is the incentive to, if you only have 10 people that you share externally, then you've got that capability. It's no additional cost. But if you're going to be doing that to the hundreds or maybe thousands of external users, then for the enterprise you can do it, and it's going to be a little bit of an additional cost. Okay, so we're sharing externally, and we're excited. And then in the last couple minutes here, I just wanted to show you two client applications that are running on my desktop. And one of them is SharePoint Designer. So I'll go back just to show you the structure of our main site that we've been working on. Oh, actually, there was one more thing that I wanted to show you, which was the term store. So the term store is something that at the SharePoint Online Administration Center would be the parent level for customers in Office 365. So there would be a parent taxonomy, which is something that could then be consumed at the individual site collection level. So here I've uploaded a custom term set, which is really just my taxonomy that I uploaded. You'll see we have a sample here that you would just open up if you wanted to then build out your own taxonomy. You import that and it just becomes a term set here on the right-hand side. And you'll see it's a pretty small term set, and it's just got a few items and a little bit of hierarchy. If I go in and I collapse this at the bottom here, you'll also see that throughout the whole system, people, and obviously in this demo environment, mostly me and my friend Chax, and we've also been adding keywords in a kind of just a social way. So if I went to a piece of content, and I'll show you that in a second, and I just added a keyword that wasn't coming from the parent taxonomy, I could just add it. This is the way I described this page I just viewed. This is the way I just described this piece of content. And let's say one of these terms is really good, Apollo. That's, of course, one of our main keywords. So I'm going to move this keyword that was generated by an end user, not managed by the parent taxonomy, and I'm going to put it in one of our product categories here. So you'll see I can list it under Xbox just for fun and say OK. And now if I go under products, Xbox, now that keyword that was just generated from somebody out there describing content in a social way, I've now up-leveled it, so anybody who wants to now use that term as a managed term, they could. And this would now be consistent all the way down to the site collection level for those to be consumed. So I want to go back to the main site and then just show you a little bit about what it looks like taking content offline and what it looks like to use SharePoint Designer. So back to our main page so you can just sort of see structure again. And then here is this same site, Fabricam portal, in SharePoint Designer. So obviously here's the home page, and if I wanted to view this, page to edit it, I can do that. And I want to go to my main page here. Edit in the browser. Yes. Sorry, that is actually not what I wanted to do. Yes. So here's that same main portal site, and a lot of the work that we did for this demo environment we did in SharePoint Designer. And it's going to pull down and it's going to kind of refactor and format. And you'll see I'm now just looking at the site. So if I wanted to do something simple as a logo change, I would just go in here and change that. But if I want to do things like put custom views, add custom workflows, just adjust lists in a little bit more of a powerful way than through the browser. Obviously, this is where I could do some design work on the home page. If I want to look at a whole list of all the lists and libraries, here is that featured stories list. And if I wanted to, I can go in here and change the properties. I could further work on the form. So the question earlier around, do I have to have InfoPath to see that? The answer was yes for what's in the demo. But if I want to actually go in here and configure the look and feel and some of the characteristics of the form, I could do it here in SharePoint Designer, and it doesn't require the higher-end SKU. And these are the 3 forms that are associated to this list. And by default, any list has those same 3 out of the box. You could certainly configure them and change them. And then if I go in and look for the different libraries, the different site columns that I have associated to this, different content types. Obviously, some of these are out-of-box content types. And if I scroll down, you'll see that we've got some of the custom, which I'm spacing on right here. Here they are. So we've got 2 custom content types that we've developed, which is what I showed earlier in that the document library. So that's a quick tour of SharePoint Designer. Chris Mayo, if you want to go a little bit deeper in terms of custom development, he starts with SharePoint Designer and then he quickly gets into Visual Studio. But he'll expose a little bit more of the developer side of SharePoint Designer. And then finally, just taking content offline. So if I navigate on the site to this Shared Documents folder, oh, that's not it. There we go. So there are 2 documents in this Shared Documents folder, SharePoint Online Capabilities, and then the presentation that actually a previous presentation that I just gave. And if I go to SharePoint Workspace, here are those 2 that are now available to me offline. Obviously, I'm connected, so this is a little bit of a cheat. But if I go in and make a change here and save that down, it's obviously going to save it back to the local copy. And then if I switch over to it quick enough, you'll see that it's synchronizing that right back to that Shared Documents folder. And now if I went back to the site, even though I changed a note, if I went back to that same site, viewed it in the browser, that would be now updated on this same copy because it changed back, it synced up that delta. And then I wanted to show one last thing since we've got just about 1 more minute for demo. And obviously if there's any questions, please ask. But one other thing that I wanted to show you was a little bit more around Excel services and how they can be leveraged. So in the demo we saw it was a nice use of Excel services and a little bit more, somebody who has a little bit more of a design sense than I do. But I'm just looking at kind of a raw feed of a graph that's stored in an Excel workbook. What this is just a kind of a longer URL that's using the REST-based URL. And it's got 2 components to it that I'll call out that it really is what you add to it for this to happen. So this first part of just inserting this into the URL where it says VTI bin Excel rest.axpx is basically saying I want to use REST services and I want them to be the Excel REST services. And then it goes to this specific document stored in this team site, in this marketing site, in this particular documents folder. And then here's the name of the file, salesanalysis.xlsx. And then I want to show this particular graph, which in Excel is just called graph 1 or chart 1. And that's how it renders here. So the neat thing you can do with this is now I'm going to go into just a PowerPoint that I had staged here so I could show you taking that same graph, which maybe was rendered as an image on a web page, and bringing that into PowerPoint. So, and again, I just want it to render as an image and paste that same URL in. And instead of opening it, I'm going to open and link to it. And hopefully you can guess what you can do here is I can resize it. But the value here, instead of just using like a screen capture tool and grabbing it and throwing the graph in there, is now this graph is actually pulling from the live data. So I can take this offline. I could be disconnected and still show the graph. But if I want to, I can just go in and kind of hit a magic button that updates it. And then if somebody has made a change to that graph, it's going to show it here in the PowerPoint to whomever now opens this. So it's a dynamic graph. It's not just an image that maybe goes out of date 2 weeks later. And just to show real quickly what this looks like, if I wanted to also insert that same thing in Word, again, I'm just inserting a picture using that URL, insert and link. And then there it is. So that's a nice use of Excel services, both in the browser and SharePoint Online, but obviously using that SharePoint Online as a source of content, a source of material, to use it in a number of different ways. So any questions on anything you saw or maybe didn't see before we go? And just was going to spend the last couple minutes, maybe 2 minutes on developer story, and then another 2 minutes just a little bit more about the administration, and then open to any questions that you have. But real quick question here. Can you move to online to on-site? So from on-premises to online, and then back online to on-premises? The answer is yes. The way you would do it is you would use those same migration tools I mentioned earlier. So if you've got SharePoint 2007 or SharePoint 2010 on-premises, and you have either a site collection or a doc library that you want to move up to the cloud, you can just do that. You point these tools and say, here's my source, here's my destination, go. And it maintains the metadata, it maintains the files, and it moves them up to the cloud. And you can use those same tools in reverse. The main thing that you usually come across when you're migrating content is around the applications. And that could be SharePoint previous version applications that you've built. Sometimes they don't translate one-to-one, or they maybe were never, there was no sandbox in 2007. And to upload those custom applications, they would have to meet the sandbox criteria. But also if you're starting in something like Notes, so not SharePoint, there are some tools that will evaluate Notes applications and also convert some so that they're ready in SharePoint. But not all business applications, obviously written maybe in SharePoint or maybe not, would translate right to the cloud. So it may be a refactoring, it may be a rewrite, or it may be a archive in some instances. Not because we don't support it, but because maybe there are, of 100 applications you have to review in a move to the cloud or move to Office 365, it may be that you only really need 30 or 40 of them. Uh-huh. So when we do a distribution of people working SharePoint on-premises and SharePoint online, that is one aspect that we don't yet support. And the question was, would they be working off of the same source? So if it's the same document and the people have access to both locations, they're just going to be accessing the content or data in the location that it's at. But if I'm in SharePoint Online and I want my data source, if I wanted to use Excel services to pull from a data source that's managed on-premises, that's a scenario we won't yet support. Say again? Not the entire site? I'm not sure what you mean. Maybe you can explain a little bit more. So from a management perspective, you can pretty much access and work with the sites how you would any site. When it comes to sharing content, so if you have 2 sites and you want them both to be driven by the same data source, that's not something we can support yet. Good question, though. Okay, so 2 more slides, and make sure to leave on time so that you can get to your next session. But I wanted to go through a little bit about our developer story, but really just hopefully feed it in as a teaser, because we've got 2 great sessions that drill into really would be their first slide, and then the rest of the session is showing you, cracking open Visual Studio, creating sandbox solutions, packaging them, but showing it what it looks like to deploy them. So, but we talk about the development in the cloud as, it may be that you never need to write a line of custom code. You can just go in and use it vanilla out of the box, or vanilla out of the box with a little bit of tweaky changes. And that could be, adding a web part, changing the page layout, picking the right template that you want to use, and then just either taking away from it or adding to it. And then there's the whole people governance and permissions, and of course you can do all that. If you add lists and libraries, that's real basic SharePoint. And certainly that's something that a lot of people will have the ability to do. and it's not such a difficult part of SharePoint that it's not a more deeper development task. When you get around to the design, which a lot of that in our demo in Fabricam was around the design, the master pages, the page layouts, the custom look and feel, custom navigation, all that you can do in SharePoint Designer. You can also leverage Visual Studio, but it depends on who you're working with. It could be the designer is using Visual Studio and handing off some of the aspects to a developer that's going a little bit deeper and adding a little bit more custom logic or custom code in Visual Studio, but still to complement so that it's a nice look and feel to the custom company intranet. Moving a little bit more to the right-hand side is certainly where it's true development. Really, truly, in Visual Studio, when you crack it open, create a new SharePoint project, it asks you, is this a sandbox solution or a farm solution? And on premises, you can do both. And in SharePoint Online, you can only do a sandbox solution. But again, scoping it at the site collection level, you would just say, yep, Visual Studio, I want to create a sandbox solution. It'll show you all the available templates that are in in Visual Studio. And then you could build to the way that the templates dictate, or you can, of course, customize. And the whole idea behind custom code is do whatever you want. And as long as it meets the criteria of the sandbox, and you can get clever where some components are in the sandbox, some components are running in Silverlight in the client, and we also support the client object model of having a way for, if I wanted to reach out to SQL Azure and pull in data, or I wanted to reach out to a line of business application that I've exposed securely, and then via web services to consume that data, I could do that, but I would be using either Silverlight or JavaScript. Once I have the data in the browser session for the end user, I could pull that and push it into a list, a library. I could do whatever it is that I want with that data. And that's the way we could get around some of the limitations of the sandbox, but again, not to position it in a way that the sandbox is limited. There was a question here. You can now do visual web parts. The requirement is in Visual Studio. So the question was, can you do visual web parts? And when you step through Visual Studio, it just asks, it's one of the project templates, is just called a visual web part. And when we first got into the private beta, Visual Studio didn't yet have a special plugin, and Chris would know better than me what the actual and where to go to get it. But on Visual Studio out of the box, if you upload a plugin, it'll enable it so visual web parts are deployable to the sandbox. So out of box in 2010, it was not supported. But now Visual Studio has added this additional plugin. Once you have it, then it doesn't look any different. It's just Visual Studio, visual web part, off you go. And it just package it up and it works just the same. But also what a lot of people are starting to leverage in the beta, which is really exciting for us, is we've just published a new article on how to work with web services and authenticate appropriately against SharePoint Online. And we published both an article and a sample code. And a lot of people have been using it in terms of building their own custom applications that for their end users run on the desktop, and for whatever purpose and requirement is pushing content, whether it's data or documents they work on, and then some workflow pushes that up into SharePoint Online for ultimate storage. Or if they want to read list data and pull that down and bring it into their on-premises applications, good use for web services in that aspect. So in the last minute, we touched a lot on what the administration side of SharePoint Online is. And this is just sort of a recap of the level of administration that we enable. So everything in green on the right-hand side is what's managed by Microsoft. That's hopefully the value of the cloud, where you may not have an IT staff, or you want them to focus on other things than just managing SharePoint. That's really those green boxes, the farm level and central admin. And everything below or inside of that is where the tenant admin or SharePoint Online administration comes in, or the individual site collections that they get created. That's complete control. Microsoft has no control over that except for the uptime, the SLA, and the performance of the server. But typical tasks, some of which I showed in demo, are what are the responsibilities of the administrations of the admin. And I actually want to go back just for a second and call out that we've got a new developer guide that we've published and a new developer resource center that's just specific to SharePoint Online. So if you really want to dig deeper than what I or Chris share here at the conference, there's a ton of new material that's just recently been published in the last couple months. And I encourage you, for both an administrator or an IT pro, if you wanted to dig a little bit deeper, there are new resource centers, lots of great information, and certainly I encourage you to try the beta because there's a lot there as well. So with 7 seconds left, and obviously I'm happy to take questions, and please feel free to head out when you need to. A couple of resources I just called out in terms of the Resource Center for developers, Resource Center for the IT pros. The last thing here, which is at the top, is a service description, which really articulates in about 30 pages, and I think it's a great read because I wrote it. But it basically tells you what you're looking for. Can I do this in SharePoint Online? Is this feature there? How much storage do I get? And when we come out with a bit more licensing information, we're going to be plugging that in and making sure that if I enable a certain user with a certain license, can they do this in SharePoint Online? There's already some of that there, but that'll get fleshed out a little bit more. So I love that you came to listen to SharePoint Online. I absolutely encourage you to try the beta. It's easy. In 10 minutes, you'll be provisioned and deployed and using SharePoint Online, trying all this stuff. And have a great rest of Tech Ed. Thanks.